This is what my gameplay looked like over 30 days ago. And this is what it looks like now. Looks pretty good, huh? Just don't look at the UI. The big secret about game feel or game juice is feedback. It's all about feedback. For example, player gives input, like pressing a spacebar to jump, and the game must give back an appropriate feedback. Instantly move character up into the air, maybe a screen shake, play some sound effects, so that the player can feel like they jump. But what does it mean to make someone feel the game? Well, as of today, you can only experience games via visuals and sound. Pretty limiting, but that's when the creative juices are born. So this is how I've made my game have a much better feedback. Since I'm making a retro shooter game, the core gameplay loop can be broken down into 3 sections: movement, combat, and world interaction. Pretty much every single shooter game out there, which is why it's crucial to make these feel as good as possible. Starting with movement, I have nuked everything in order to make movement from scratch. I know, pretty smart. My movement mechanics involve move, look around, crouch, jump, slide, and backwards slide jump. More on that later. Initially, I didn't plan on adding sliding to my game, but when I was playtesting, it felt incredibly wrong to just move fast and then drastically slow down when you crouch. So I had no other choice but to include it, which was quite painful as it took me a lot of time. Default movement values provided with character movement components are quite bad. I mean, look at this. After increasing movement speed, gravity, and some friction values, the movement is much faster and more responsive. Time to spice it up. We can start with camera animations. Here is some footage with and without. Of course, this can be quite motion sickness inducing, so it is crucial to have an option to turn it on and off. Speaking of camera, head bob. Yeah, pretty simple, I don't know. Last camera trick is to use camera tilt. We simply tilt the camera in the direction of movement to add weight to set movement. We can spice it up further
Yeah, boy.
by adding some footstep sound. I found this Sony's website, and there is over 200 gigabytes of free sound effects. Yeah, it took a couple hours to download and unpack these. But now we have footsteps, and most importantly, different sounds for different surfaces. We can spice it up even further by adding particles. So I've made these footsteps effects, which will definitely be visible in a first-person game. Oh, and sliding and landing too. We can spice it up
Yeah, boy.
even further by changing the FOV at runtime. If player moves fast, we increase the FOV. The change is mostly visible if you slide and if you fall. I also thought about playing with post-process effects like vignettes, chromatic aberration, but I thought that this is just too much, and too much is also bad. It's all about finding a balance. And with all of that, the movement feel is done. Oh wait, there is also weapon movement. Currently, to prevent weapon wall clip bag, I simply just scale the weapon mesh down and move it closer to the camera. This way it doesn't collide with the walls and is easy and fast to set up. But there's a catch. Quite a few actually. One of them being this, because I'm playing a camera shake animation which moves the camera down, and because the weapon is so small and so close to the camera, any movement of said camera will cause the weapon to bug out. And honestly, I was a bit stumped here. I mean, Unreal Engine is the first engine that comes to mind when you think about first-person games. So how is it that an engine this big and old has no native solution for the most common issue first-person games face? Rant over. I tried rendering the weapon separately using render targets, but it caused me to lose over 50 frames. 50 frames. Outrageous. And then I found this. This material scales the vertices of the weapon towards the camera so that they appear to be always in front. Don't know how it works, but it does, so I don't care. Also, I'm the only one who got hearted by the creator of this method, you know, just had to brag a bit about this. With one obstacle out of the way, my dream and hopes were restored. So let's spice up the weapons. Take a look at weapon switching in Dusk. Notice how it is immediate. You press a button, your current weapon gets banished to the Shadow Realm, and you quickly rise up your next chosen weapon. So I did that. To make it better, we can follow the previous steps mentioned in the movement section. Play camera shake, sound effect, particles, or now. Next spice is weapon sway. You move around, weapon moves around. You look around, weapon looks around. It makes it so that the weapon feels like it has some weight to it. So what about actual combat? We can improve regular strike with camera animation, sound effects. One thing that can be done specifically for melee attacks is a weapon trail, which is just a fancy particle effect. I didn't want a regular trail, no, I wanted a distortion trail, the one you see over a burning fire. But there's one problem. How? I found this tutorial made by a fellow Japanese Unreal dev. I have no idea what bro is waffling about. After some tinkering, I got this result. It all looks cool, but there is an issue with tracing. As you can see, I do a box trace where the weapon is. Because of the material I'm using, this weapon is not here, it's actually inside of the wall, hence the weird trace results. I asked ChatGPT for help and it suggested tracing from the camera instead, which helped to some degree. Next, I've added bullet holes or strike holes in case of this hammer. I've made a texture using a GIMP imported into Unreal, and again, trace issue. It just looks off that I swing hammer here and the bullet hole is here. So I just use good old regular hit scan. I trace from the camera to whenever player is looking. It's gonna look better when we add crossed hair. I've added some impact particles, changed the footstep particles to translucent, and most importantly, sounds. Sound design is very underrated in game development, but it is extremely important, and at one point I'll definitely do some big rework of it. But for now, keep it simple. Take a listen to this sound. It's pretty good on its own, but if we add a part of some rocks falling to it, we get a dirt impact. With my previous setup, you could hit two objects at once, which just no, I mean, what? So I fixed it. You can push simulated objects by hitting them. And the last improvement is camera shake whenever you hit anything. And now for the long-awaited guns. First, let's add a shadowless point light that will illuminate the area every time you fire. Recoil, but not screen recoil, gun recoil. This is a procedural recoil driven by curves, meaning if I increase this thing, the gun will move further. Muzzle flash with a projectile trace, fire sound effect, spawn bullet hole on impact, spawn particles on impact, and most importantly, spawn sound effects on impact. Camera shake for firing the weapon, crosshair. These textures are from Acid Jesus himself, Kenny, but they are quite chunky, so at one point I will make my own. Right now it's quite static, so let's add some animation to it. Yeah, that's all for now. Gore. Time to get demonetized. Just kidding, I'm not monetized in the first place. Let's add some square red particles. Since I'm making a retro game with quite strong pixelated look, it's okay to just use squares. Splash, bloody mist, ribbon trails. I don't really like this one, so in the end I just disabled it and put it all together. Nice. Add some decals when particles hit the floor. Make some particles collide with the floor. Nice. Now, I've had a lot of problems with decals. Mostly, you can't have masked or opaque decals, so they end up looking very washed when there is a little light. Take a look at these two fellas. One is a decal, one is a plain with masked material. Both look decent, but if I move them into a shadow area, decal loses all its color, its juice. I've spent a whole Sunday looking for solutions, but I couldn't find anything on how to make masked decals, as it is impossible in UE5. Why? But anyway, I found a solution using render targets instead, except I haven't implemented it yet. Also, decals are quite expensive if they overlap. I mean, I lose like 100 frames in this area. Like, what? So to sum it all up, let's just chuck it into Forget About It bin and add some sounds. This sound is a layer of two sounds, flash impact and violating an orange, which is a common technique used to make gore blood sounds. Of course, I used the sound from Sony's because I don't want to create a mess in my kitchen, as it is already quite messy, and I don't want to feel bad just destroying a harmless, innocent little fruit. Sound really is important. I've made a drastic decision to get rid of ragdolls and just use a death animation instead. I just think it's easier, lower scope, as I don't have to stress over physics breaking and sound sort of physics colliding. A little knockback when the enemy dies. If you deal damage below a certain threshold, enemies will explode into chunks. This is oddly satisfying. The satisfaction can be pushed even further with hit marks. If you played any modern shooter game, you most likely seen this little cross in the middle of the screen when you hit an enemy. The main purpose of this is to activate the neurons in our monkey brain, which ties to feedback. You hit enemy, you see hit mark, your brain rewarded for doing the right job. I tried a bunch of different textures, which again are crosshairs from Acid Jesus. We can also add some sound effects for the hit mark. I tried a few different ones, but I ended up using this one as it is the most satisfying one. But I fear it can be too annoying or distracting, so for now, let's just forget about it. I noticed that some of my particles were possessed. You can see them moving very slowly. I tried to use math to solve the problem by manually making the particles enter rest state when they move below certain speed, which worked. But then I saw this checkbox. I set the number of max collisions to 1 so that the particles can stick onto the wall. Hit stun, hit flash, hit shake. Hit flash happens when you damage an enemy and they flash for a short second. It can be whatever color you want, and it ties back to feedback. You get immediate response that you in fact damaged something. Hit stun is when you, again, for a short duration, make the enemy either stop or drastically slow down. This effect helps sell the impact of the damage dealt. I've also made this slow-mo effect. I think I'm gonna use it for bosses or some events. Hit shake, which you guessed it, makes the enemy shake whenever it is hit. All of these are quite subtle, yet combined have a huge impact on gameplay. Well, what about the player getting hit? First, we can add camera shake, particle effects, player hit sound, impact hit sound, and this screen overlay animation. We can also do some miscellaneous work, like adding a blood mask for weapons. I've had this mask before, but it was kinda mid, so I've made it much more juicier. The question is, how do we get rid of that blood? This is something that I either have never noticed in any game, or maybe very few games have this mechanic. In movies or anime, when a character has a bloody sword, they swing said sword and the blood just flies off. I don't know if it would work in real life, as I've never held a bloody weapon in my life yet, but in a video game context, it sounds awesome. If there is no hit when swinging your weapon, I reset the blood mask and spawn some particles. Also, dry firing. It happens when you try to fire a gun, but there is no ammo. In most modern games, you also get a sound cue as your magazine is approaching zero capacity. And of course I've added the most basic ammo UI. The last part of game feel is world interaction, like picking up items, and that's the only interaction there is in my game. So when you pick up an item, spawn some particles, play a sound, screen overlay animation, crosshair animation, and done. I've also accidentally discovered a movement bug, that sometimes when you slide and jump, your character jumps really high. At first I just forgot about it, as I had no idea why it happens. Still I have no idea why it happens. But I have noticed that when you slide, look behind you, and then jump, you get a massive jump boost. Again, why? But all I know, this is not a bug, it's a feature. And finally, after combining all of that together, we are left with somewhat polished prototype. Don't know about 100 times more, but definitely makes it 10 times better. Yep, that's all the updates for this unnamed game. I have decided to prioritize gameplay first and not the art, or at least before I'll go deep into art. Which brings me to a question of what is next. Obviously, content. Things like levels, weapons, enemies, story, music. What should the game be about? I've had some ideas, but I'm gonna have to do some more research to find something that is not only marketable, but also enjoyable for me to work on. Thank you for watching. Cheers!